You can continue watching the White House briefing online at cspan.org as we take you live to this hearing on U.S. water resources and infrastructure with the Commanding General of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers.
Our meeting will come to order. Let's see, since we do have members here that want to be recognized to introduce different ones, and I happen to be one of those, I think we might go ahead before opening statements and do that before we lose someone. So I'd like to go ahead, and we already know Lieutenant General Todd Semonite. He's been here your third time, is that correct? You're a regular here. And I'd recognize at this time Senator Cardin to recognize Pete Ron, to introduce Pete Ron.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to have Secretary Ron here before our committee. Secretary Ron is the Secretary of of Transportation in Maryland. But as I was telling the chairman, this is the third state that he has been Secretary of Transportation. He's also directed the Missouri Department of Transportation and the New Mexico State Highway and Transportation Department. He just can't hold on to a job. He's always but we're very proud of the work that he does in Maryland. We have a pretty challenging organization in Maryland where the Secretary of Transportation is responsible for all modes of transportation and coordinating all modes of transportation. And Mr. Ron's done an outstanding job in directing that department. It's a very large budget. But he also serves as president of the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials from 2007 to 2008. He's held other positions in national leadership, and we're proud to have him before our committee.
Very good. And recognize Senator Merkley for your introduction.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, for holding this subcommittee hearing to discuss the importance of investing in our ports and waterway infrastructure. I'm pleased to introduce Bandon Port Commissioner Rick Gaucher from my home state of Oregon, here to testify. Not only is he a port commissioner, he's been a fisherman and small businessman for almost 50 years and is involved in many aspects of the fishing community. He owns and operates the fishing vessel Peso II and owns the Sacred Sea Tuna brand. He is chair of the Oregon Albacore Commission. He is president of Aquatic Resources, Inc., a consulting group for live seafood holding and shipping. He is chairman of Fish Cred, a statewide fishermen's organization. Very few people know as intimately as Rick the importance of maintenance for our small ports, our navigation channels, and our jetties. In fact, Rick should probably be home preparing his boat for annual maintenance, but he's here on behalf of the fishermen whose lives and livelihoods depend on this funding to make sure they can get to safe harbor. He has crossed about every bar between San Francisco and Canada, and he's here to advocate for the Army Corps budget to make sure our small ports stay the economic driver of our coastal communities. Thank you for being here, Commissioner. Appreciate it.
Thank you, and welcome, Commissioner Gaucher. Senator Shelby, would you like to introduce your...
Thank you, Member. Thank you, Chairman Inhofe and Ranking Member Cardin. It's a great opportunity for me today to introduce Jimmy Ryan, who is the Director and the CEO of the Alabama State Port Authority. I'm glad he could join us here today. I've known Jimmy and his family for many years, and the work that he's done at the Port Authority of Mobile, the Port of Mobile, has been not only vital to our state, but also to the Gulf Coast region. Jimmy is, as I said, the Director and the CEO of the Alabama State Port Authority. The Port of Mobile is currently the 10th largest U.S. seaport in import and export of domestic trade by the total volume. The port's largest commodities are coal, crude oil, steel, and petroleum. In any given year, between 52 to 67 million tons of cargo moves annually through the port, and that number continues to grow. Jimmy Lyons has continuously worked to meet the growing demands of a post-Panama Canal market. In 2014, the Port Authority submitted a request to the Corps of Engineers to consider increasing the depth and width of the Mobile Harbor Channel to its authorized dimensions. The Corps subsequently began a General Reevaluation Report, GRR, which examines potential costs and benefits associated with the deepening and the widening of the port. This study is expected to conclude in 2019. Mr. Chairman, the Port of Mobile provides access to nearly 15,000 miles of inland waterways serving the Great Lakes, Ohio Valley, Upper Mississippi, and Tennessee Valley ports. Simply put, the port serves as an economic driver for much more than just Mobile. The new administration has made economic growth a top priority to ensure that our industries and businesses, big and small, can continue to compete in the increasingly complicated global marketplace. To facilitate this growth, it's important that Congress make infrastructure legislation a priority. The Corps plays, as we all know, an important part and role in modernizing our nation's waterways. Corps projects provide more than $100 billion annually in net economic benefits. I believe this demonstrates the job creation and economic growth associated with such investments. I'm thankful for the committee today under your leadership is working to understand the challenges that we're facing, and I look forward to hear the testimony of all the witnesses. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Dr. Lyons, welcome. And I won't say we saved the best to last. That'd sound a little self-serving. But we have Mr. Grant Humphreys. He's the town founder of Carlton Landing in Oklahoma. I'm happy to have Grant here. I've known his daddy, Kirk, for longer than he's been alive. So it's a pleasure having you here in the capacity of what you're successfully doing in Oklahoma. He's a real estate developer, investor, and home builder. About 10 years ago, Grant began the process of founding and developing Carlton Landing at Lake Eufaula in Oklahoma. And some of you may not be aware of the fact that Oklahoma has more miles of freshwater shoreline than any of the 50 states. Did you know that, Shelby? Yeah, there we go. Well, in Carlton Landing, Grant has embarked on an ambitious project which is already showing great successes, which he will be sharing with us. In addition to founding and developing Carlton Landing, Grant is also the founder and principal of Traditional Craft Homes, a home building company providing custom and specific production homes. In developing a project on Lake Eufaula, Grant has become involved with a community of lake developers in the region and can speak to his and others' experiences with getting a project started. So I welcome you here today, Grant. Today's first Transportation Infrastructure Subcommittee hearing is on a subject that is very important to our whole nation, including my state of Oklahoma. Our nation's water resources provide our economy with a platform for the movement of goods, facilitate trade with the world, and bring jobs and many other benefits to the communities that surround them. The U.S. Corps of Engineers projects generate over $109 billion annually in economic benefits and generate over $34 billion in revenue to the United States Treasury. Unfortunately, like most of our infrastructure, our water resources are aging and in great need of repair and upgrades. Recognizing this need, the last two Congresses have worked to authorize new projects and create reforms to provide more funding, federal funding, and also private investing, something we couldn't do not too long ago. Today's hearing will explore the benefits of our water resources, provide to local and national economies, and examine and the continued needs that must be met so that the U.S. can remain globally competitive and provide jobs and other local benefits here at home. In Oklahoma, we know these benefits firsthand with ports along the McClellan-Kerr Arkansas navigation system connecting Oklahoma with the Mississippi River and with the rest of the world, and over 20 Army Corps of engineers manage the lake. My state, our industries, and our citizens know the impact of our many water resource projects through cheaper goods, cheaper electricity, jobs, flood protection, and many recreational opportunities. The McClellan-Kerr Arkansas River Navigation System is 445 miles long, and it spans Arkansas and the eastern part of Oklahoma. Between the Port of Muskogee and Tulsa Port of Catoosa, Oklahoma ports are home to over 70 companies and industries shipping 5.7 million tons of cargo with values of $2.56 billion, employing more than 6,500 Oklahomans and creating an overall economic impact of more than $400 million to our state each year. The ability to move all kinds of goods without relying solely on one form of transportation keeps shipping costs low, benefiting companies that ship their wares regionally and globally, and benefiting consumers who can stretch their dollars further. In addition to moving products and manufactured goods, other Army Corps projects help our communities by providing for flood risk management, water storage, hydropower, and recreation. Every authorized use of a Corps project allows the surrounding communities to realize a greater potential for economic development and improves the quality of life for those who depend on the infrastructure, either directly or indirectly. The challenge before us today is to understand the full need for repairing and maintaining our current infrastructure and the need for new projects to ensure that the United States remains globally competitive and our communities continue to reap the benefits of the Army Corps infrastructure. With the topic of infrastructure in the news during the election cycle and within the new administration, the time is now to work towards solutions to meeting these needs. So I thank our witnesses for being here today. I want to make one comment about the attendance here. This is taking place at the same time that we're having a Senate Armed Services Committee, which I have been the ranking member, so it's difficult to be two places at once. They will be going back and forth. Senator Cardin.
Well, first, Mr. Chairman, let me say what a pleasure it is to be sitting next to you in this committee as we convene our first public hearing of our subcommittee. Senator Inhofe and I came to the United States Congress on the same day in the House of Representatives, and we've been friends ever since. And it's a real pleasure to serve with him on this subcommittee because I'm going to let you in on a secret. Senator Inhofe is one of the most progressive people I know in this country on infrastructure development. I told him I would be glad to come. Yes, I always told him I'd be glad to come to a state to campaign for him, but he told me he would prefer me to stay in Maryland. But the two of us share a passion for the importance of water infrastructure, roads and bridges, transit systems, for the entire modernization of our infrastructure, because both of us understand it means jobs. It means U.S. competitiveness. It means America having the ability to compete globally. That's what it means, and we recognize the importance of the governmental part, the private sector part, and putting this all together. So I particularly want to just acknowledge my pleasure to serve as the ranking member with Senator Inhofe on this subcommittee. And I think it's very appropriate that our first hearing deals with the role of public-private sector in water resources, because we need both. Now, you heard Senator Inhofe brag a little bit about his state on water projects. Well, I could spend the next 2 hours talking about the state of Maryland, and I'm not going to do that. But I am going to compliment again Secretary Ron for the leadership we have in our Maryland port. I had a briefing on the Maryland port last week. We're doing extremely well. January 2017, the Port of Baltimore hit another record month. We are the closest to the Midwest than any other East Coast port, which gives Maryland an advantage. We rank 9th overall in value of cargo. And Baltimore is well known for the cars that come in and out of that port as the largest in that region. And we are significantly increasing our capacity on container. We handle a great deal. One of the facts, I just have to put this in the record and brag, the Journal of Commerce ranked the Port of Baltimore as #1 in the nation for container berth productivity for 3 years in a row, with the port averaging 71 container movements each hour per berth. We're pretty efficient, and we're proud of our efficiency in the Port of Baltimore. Under our state leadership, we moved quickly, recognizing that the expansion of the Panama Canal would allow larger vessels to be able to be handled. We had to have the facilities, the Port of Baltimore, in order to be able to deal with that. And Baltimore is one of only 4 eastern U.S. ports with a 50-foot channel and a 50-foot container berth, allowing to accommodate some of the largest container ships in the world. And on July 19, 2016, the Ever Lampant, a cargo carrier from Taiwan, was the first supersized container ship to reach Baltimore through the Panama Canal. So we're ready. We're ready. And it's critically important to our economy. I got some numbers, and this is going to be typical of just about every port in our country. But the business from the port generates 13,000 plus jobs, direct jobs, with more than 127 jobs in total in Maryland are linked to the port activities. This is very important to our economy. $3 billion in wages and salaries, contributing more than $310 million into state and local tax revenues. So this is an important business for a senator from Maryland. It's an important business from a senator from every one of our states. And that's why we are particularly pleased to have this hearing. I do want to just point out that we can't do this just by one of the stakeholders alone. And we appreciate the role the federal government plays. It's very important, the direct help of the water resources, and we're going to talk today, General will talk a little bit about the next important leg in Maryland, which is Mid-Bay, on the dredging materials and claiming of lands. My predecessor, Senator Sarbanes, was directly responsible for Poplar Island, which has been a great success and a model for the nation on allowing reclaiming of land, as well as a location for dredge material. And we now need to move on to Mid-Bay, which has already been studied, and I think we're on track, but we'll talk about it. But we also need the roads, the bridges, we also need the rail, and we also need the private sector. And this hearing is an attempt to try to understand we need all of the above. And I hope that as a result of this hearing and further hearings that we have, that we'll be able to get the investments by the public and private sector so America can indeed be competitive in our port and water activities so we can get the job growth that the people of this country need.
Well, thank you, Senator Cardin. And let me just say that we have worked so well together for so many years, and that we work on things that actually become productive. I can remember, confession is good for the soul, and if you'll pardon me for bragging a little bit, when we have been having our meeting with the chairman on the Republican side, we have them every Tuesday at 12:15. When it comes to my turn, I always say, now from the committee that actually does things, because we did. I say to my friend, Senator Cardin, that we had the FAST Act, we had the Water Act, we had TSCA, the Chemical Act. Those are 3 of the 4 biggest projects or bills that were actually passed. So we're used to accomplishing things. Now, what we're going to do, because we have 5 witnesses, and we have many, such as Senator Capito and I, who have other committees at the same time, we're going to try to get you to adhere to, if you would, the 5-minute maximum on your comments. And, of course, your entire statement will be made a part of the record. And we'll start with General Semonite.
Chairman Imhoff, Ranking Member Cardin, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, I'm Lieutenant General Todd Semonite, Commanding General of the United States Army Corps of Engineers and the 54th Chief of Engineers. I'm pleased to be here today to discuss the role of the United States Army Corps of Engineers Civil Works Program and the associated value of water resource investments across the nation. The Corps has played a significant role in the development of the nation's water resources and currently manages an extensive national water resource infrastructure portfolio. This includes maintenance of 13,000 miles of coastal navigation channels, 12,000 miles of inland waterways, 715 dams, 241 locks, 14,000 miles of levees, and hydropower plants at 75 locations. These projects help provide risk reduction from flooding in our river valleys and along our coast, facilitate the movement of approximately 2 billion tons of waterborne commerce, and provide up to 24% of the nation's hydropower. There are about 250 million recreational visits a year to Corps lands and reservoirs, making the Corps one of the top federal recreation providers. Corps water resource investments bring significant value to the nation. For example, the United States maritime transportation industry supports approximately $2 trillion in commerce, with over 2 billion tons of commerce moving through harbors, channels, and waterways constructed and maintained by the Corps. Approximately 98% of the United States overseas trade by weight and 99% by volume enters or leaves the United States through a U.S. coastal port. The inland waterway supports this commerce by facilitating the export of approximately 60% of U.S. grain, 22% of coal, and 22% of petroleum products. Corps risk reduction management projects and activities provide resilient risk reduction infrastructure and prepare individuals and communities for potential floods. The Corps is responsible for the construction and operation of 383 major dam and reservoir projects that regulates floodwaters in the nation's major rivers and tributaries, and has constructed over 14,700 miles of levees in partnership with local non-federal partners. Additionally, the Corps has constructed over 90 major coastal shoreline protection projects along 240 miles of the nation's coastline that provide storm damage reduction benefits to vulnerable coastal communities. Over the past 10 years, it is estimated on average that Corps risk management reduction projects have prevented over $65 billion worth of flood damages to urban and rural communities across the nation. The Corps maintains recreation facilities at over 400 of its multi-purpose projects. The Corps has a long history of developing partnerships within existing recreation authorities. It leases about half of the 5,000 recreation sites at these multi-purpose projects to the public and private entities, including private sector commercial operators, states, and local governments. Private recreation sites include approximately 562 privately owned marinas, resorts, campgrounds, boat ramps, fuel docks, convenience stores, and other public use areas. The Corps has constructed much of this infrastructure in the first half of the 20th century, and some of it is experiencing varying stages of degradation and disrepair. In fact, approximately half of the Corps lock and dam facilities are more than 50 years old and bring operations and maintenance challenges commensurate with their age. The Corps dedicates a significant amount of its resources to maintain the key features of these locks and dams, hydropower facilities, and other water resources and infrastructure. Per these requirements, a significant portion of the Civil Works program is devoted to maintaining these systems so they can continue to provide economic and environmental benefits to the nation and to address significant risks to safety. To support the current and future requirements of the nature's water resource infrastructure, the Corps is exploring alternative financing and funding options, including public-private partnerships, also referred to as P3s. Through an assessment of policy requirements and application of project-specific experience, the Corps is seeking to demonstrate how a collaboration between the public and private sectors may improve the Corps' ability to deliver the nation's infrastructure needs. The Corps recognizes that significant investments are required to sustain the performance of our water infrastructure portfolio to an acceptable level of risk, and we greatly appreciate the support from the Congress in addressing these needs. As required in WRDA 2014, the Corps provided a report to Congress in spring 2016 capturing lessons learned from the exploration of P3 concepts to date. As part of that journey, and with the support of Congress, the Corps was able to start the Fargo-Moorhead Flood Risk Management Project in North Dakota. We acknowledge the congressional direction in the recent fiscal year 2017 appropriation language regarding the need for a more robust P3 policy, and we look forward to working with Congress and the administration to develop this policy guidance. Investments by the Civil Works program reduce the risk of flood impacts in the communities throughout the nation, facilitate commercial navigation, restore and protect significant ecosystems, generate low-cost renewable hydropower, and support American jobs. Continued investment in critical civil works infrastructure projects is an investment in the nation's economy, security, employment, and quality of life, now and in the future. Thank you for the privilege to testify about the Corps' role in sustaining the nation's water resource infrastructure and economic opportunities associated with our Civil Works program. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Very good. Thank you, General. And Director Lyons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Cardin, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. My organization, the Alabama State Port Authority, is the non-federal sponsor at the Port of Mobile, which, as Senator Shelby mentioned, the 10th largest U.S. seaport by total trade. The committee understands that 80% of global consumption occurs outside our borders, and ships carrying our commerce are getting much larger than our deepwater seaports can handle. At Mobile, post-Panamax and wide-body tankers are already servicing our terminals, albeit inefficiently. Despite our constraints, we've attracted manufacturing and retail distribution investments, including Walmart's newly announced 2.6 million square foot international distribution center, which is under construction now. But growth is unsustainable at our current channel depth and width. My organization has invested over $850 million in facilities and federal channel infrastructure. Two of our investments in the private petroleum terminals recently reported double-digit cargo growth. Mobile's public and private terminals generate about $23.5 billion in economic value and employ over 154,000 people. On a larger scale, the U.S. seaports generate $4.6 trillion in economic value. U.S. seaports will invest $154.8 billion and create 1.6 million jobs by 2020, and 82% of that investment will occur in the U.S. Gulf. Ports are doing their part to grow the economy, and we provide significant return on federal investment. Now the time has come for both the administration and Congress to give equal weight to seaports when grappling with infrastructure investments. Underinvestment and underfunding the Corps' Civil Works program result in inefficient, poorly maintained harbors, thereby increasing shipper cost, reducing our global competitiveness, aggravating the maintenance dredging backlog, and adversely impacting our tax base and job market. We must endeavor to revise law and reform procedures to better plan, fund, implement, and maintain waterway infrastructure necessary for U.S. commerce. I respectfully offer a few suggestions to achieve these goals. One, continue biennial review of the Water Resource Development Act to further timely reforms. Also, the Corps should submit annually to Congress a comprehensive report on its Civil Works program to provide line item insight into program progression and cost. Two, the Corps should implement a strategic 5-year budget cycle. Today, the Corps works on 2-year budgets that fail to capture any project's full capital need through implementation. For example, the Corps' budget will only address 2 of the 3+ years of an authorized study and provides no guarantees for project engineering and design or construction phase funding. Once authorized projects are in the pipeline, they should be budgeted and secured funds through completion. 3, provide full allocation of the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund available funds to guarantee year-in, year-out maintenance obligations. 5-year budgeting cycles could provide Congress specifics on long-range maintenance funding obligations while providing new insights into newly authorized project maintenance. 4th, streamline the 333 rule waiver process. Complex studies require necessary science to comply with NEPA, and much of that science takes a year or more to complete. Corps guidance requires that waivers be held until its tentatively selected plan is completed, adding up to a year to the project. Streamline the process and delegate the waiver decision authority to the division commander. 5, reduce or eliminate the external peer reviews. The Corps has qualified professionals capable of sound engineering and program delivery. Many external experts do not understand Corps processes or mandates. The Corps focuses on educating consultants on the why rather than sound engineering, further delaying implementation. We agree we must modernize our ports, and it will cost billions of dollars. As deepened and widened channels come online, there will be additional demands on the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund. We achieved significant gains in asset management through risk-based analysis and performance-based budgeting, but we need to take a longer view towards budgeting and identifying program savings by reducing bureaucracy. The Alabama State Port Authority thanks this committee for its leadership in recognizing the nexus between water resources and economic prosperity. I appreciate this opportunity and happy to address any questions.
Thank you, Director Lyons. Mr. Humphreys.
Chairman Inhofe, Ranking Member Cardin, distinguished members of the committee, it's a pleasure to be here today. As a third-generation real estate investor and developer from Oklahoma, we have a pleasure of creating places that foster community and allow folks to live healthy and rewarding lives. Our family's had a long history on Lake Eufaula. We've been there for over 45 years now. 10 years ago, we began a journey of creating a new town on the shores of Lake Eufaula in southeast Oklahoma. We called the place Carlton Landing, and the site we chose was a 1,900-acre site that was on the same cove where I learned to water ski as a boy. The land is connected to 10 miles of shoreline that's either owned or controlled by the Corps of Engineers. It was our desire that Carlton Landing would be seen as a model for good development, the kind that conserves our natural assets, that provides a boost to rural economies, and creates great places for people to live, work, create, and play. Before I share a story, I want to say a few words about the Corps staff. We worked closely with the Corps staff since 2007, and we built a good rapport. To their credit, we found them to be accessible, responsive, capable, and committed. I have great respect for their authority and the critical nature of their mission. Here's our story. In 2008, we put together a master plan for Carlton Landing, which included 3,000 homes, a town center, shops, restaurants, schools, churches, parks, and trails. The vision was to create a complete lakefront community. And since the Corps controlled all access to the lake, from the beginning, we understood that our ability to implement that vision would be absolutely dependent on our ability to work with the Corps. We requested a minor zoning change that would allow us to have walking trails to access the lake, just a 4-foot wide gravel chip trail. It was suggested that we partner with a conservation group, so we partnered with the Nature Conservancy. And then it was suggested that we might have a smoother track to get approval if we were a public entity. So we went through the process of actually taking our master plan community and incorporating into a public municipality. Over a 3-year time frame, through all these steps, the Corps' response to our rezoning request was professional, it was courteous, but it was always the answer no. Title 36 specifically empowers the district commander to use discretion in making minor changes to a shoreline management plan. We discovered that due to the fact that the Eufaula EIS had not been updated since 1977, the previous district commander at the Tulsa District Office had made promises to federal environmental agencies that absolutely no changes would be made until a new EIS was completed. But EISs take funding, and Congress had deferred that funding for several sessions. So we were also informed that private money could not be accepted. So the lake was in a zoning gridlock, and the local Corps staff's hands were tied. By the summer of 2010, it appeared that our vision for Carlton Landing was dead in the water. In March of 2011, Senator Inhofe met directly with Tulsa District Commander, and within days, we saw a new tone. Forward motion was realized, and the Corps staff was now on a new mission to update the Eufaula EIS. By April of 13, the EIS was completed, a new shoreline management plan was created, and the rezoning action that we needed was complete. By 2015, the town of Carlton Landing had completed a long-term lease of 420 acres of federal lands from the Corps. And today we're working on dozens of projects still with the Corps office, trying to bring that vision to fruition. Ultimately, it took us 8 years to obtain Corps permission to install a community boat dock with a gangway attached to our own land. 8 years. Somehow, despite the regulatory roadblock, we were able to start and create a lake town even though we didn't have lake access. So while it's true that we've had success with the Corps, the journey to get here has been anything but easy. Unfortunately, our success came only after direct, top-down political pressure from the highest levels in Washington. Without a forceful hand of political involvement to unfreeze the process and to create a door of opportunity, I believe that our efforts would continue to bear no fruit. In our case, the staff was well-intended, but their hands were tied by past commitments and regulatory gridlock. It's unclear how many Corps projects are affected by the same structural barriers that have been established over time. But issues such as a petrified EIS or a frozen shoreline management plan are a deal killer for a private developer. This should not be the case because it limits success only to those with political connections, deep pockets, and the ability to wait through unrealistic timelines. Every private sector developer project, Carlton Landing included, is absolutely dependent upon obtaining assurances of entitlements within a reasonable time frame. In preparation for today's hearing, I've received good feedback from several developers from across the country. Some have had a positive experience with the Corps, but several have had a very troubling experience. Some had experiences so difficult that they had to walk away from the deal, resulting in significant financial loss. And I think that's more the norm than the exception. I appreciate General Semonite's no-nonsense approach to accomplishing his mission. I believe he's the kind of leader that the Corps needs to turn the ship around and create a culture of action that brings about the desired outcomes. And I also appreciate the legislative work of the Water Resources Development Act. It gives clear direction and it aims at the right targets. In closing, there's a strong market for careful, smart, sustainable development on our nation's lakes, rivers, and waterways. The Corps is in a position to either encourage or to hinder economic growth at the local level. If we're serious about attracting private investment in and around our natural resources in a way that protects our natural assets while also maximizing their value, I believe it's necessary to set the table for developers and create a better process to clearly define the Corps' regulatory landscape in a way that works for the private sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Humphreys. Secretary Ron.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Cardin, members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to discuss the roles of the public and private sectors for our ports. Ports are the key links in U.S. access to global transportation networks, and federal navigation channels provide that access to these facilities. I thank the committee for continuing to support maritime infrastructure and commerce, especially with respect to essential dredging projects that keep our shipping channels, our maritime highways, safe and open for business. This is a high priority for the Hogan administration. The Helen Delich Bentley Port of Baltimore is an economic engine, not just for Maryland and the region, but for our nation. As Senator Cardin had mentioned during his opening remarks, it generates approximately 13,650 jobs and about 128,000 total jobs linked to port activities. It's noteworthy that the average income for the port direct job is 16% higher than the average Maryland salary. Our public-private partnership agreement with Ports America Chesapeake and the availability of a 50-foot deep container berth has positioned the Port of Baltimore to attract cargo growth associated with last year's Panama Canal expansion. Our tonnage increased 9.3% in the first 8 months since the canal opened. The port's coal business has also increased significantly over that same period, as these ships need deep water too. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has been very responsive to our port, to our shippers, carriers, and congressional concerns about the planning process for channel improvements, and has initiated reforms that were included in the WRDA 2014. Because of these planning reforms, WRDA 2014 and WRDA 2016 authorized 9 major port projects that provide for channel improvements to accommodate the new generation of larger and much more economically efficient ships and capitalize on the opening of the improved Panama Canal. This inventory of new projects, along with several ongoing efforts that predate WRDA 14, produced an inventory of 11 projects with a total cost in excess of $4 billion and a federal cost in excess of $2.5 billion. Out of the 11 projects to date, only 2 received federal funding, and a third project was completed by a port that simply could not wait for federal funding. The average appropriation over the last 8 years for coastal navigation construction has been around $170 million per year. While this represents an increase over the administration's budget requests for those years, it still requires about 15 years to clear the existing inventory. In the highly competitive world economy, the low level of federal funding to construct navigation channel improvements is holding America back and is simply unacceptable. It is not only navigation projects that are at issue. Like most ports, it is critical that the port deliver sufficient long-term dredged material placement capacity to support maintenance of its 50-foot deep channel in terms of both depth and width, to capitalize on anticipated growth and maintain our existing business. The Mid-Chesapeake Bay Island project that was authorized in WRDA 14 will use dredge material from the port's navigation channels to restore the James and Barren Islands and recreate a critical environmental resource in the middle Chesapeake Bay. Like all WRDA 2014 projects, this project faces deauthorization in calendar year 2021 if it does not receive federal funds for construction by that time. The Mid-Bay project is critical because it will provide 45+ years of dredge material placement capacity. Federal funding is essential to enable opening of the Mid-Bay project by the time it is needed and to avoid deauthorization. I thank the chairman and ranking member for their support of the Mid-Bay project in WRDA 2014 and respectfully ask the subcommittee to support report language in the next WRDA to ensure continued authorization for the project. Additionally, federal funding for core dredging has been constrained over the last several years, and continued constraints will negatively impact the port. With larger ships calling today, it is imperative that Baltimore's harbor and channels be maintained at fully authorized depths and widths on a year-round basis to facilitate efficient and safe maritime commerce. Maryland remains fully committed to working with our federal partners and the private sector to deliver safe, efficient, and cost-effective maritime commerce infrastructure in Maryland that contributes to the 26% of U.S. GDP and 23 million American jobs attributable to all ports. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and I will be happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you, Secretary Ron. Commissioner Gaucher.
Thank you, Chairman Inhofe. Ranking Member Cardin and all of the rest of the members. I appreciate the opportunity to speak here for small ports in the Pacific Northwest, Oregon, across the country. I come from a little town called Bandon, Oregon, population of a little over 3,000. And I've been a commercial fisherman most of my life. Now I fish primarily for albacore tuna. My brother and I, when we get ready to go fishing, we supply our boat with enough provisions to be at sea for about 2 weeks at a time. And we spend most of that time between 100 and 200 miles offshore. Because our boats are relatively small and relatively slow, when weather is forecasted that's beyond our means to deal with, we have to go into whatever port is closest to us. When the forecast is even worse, we have to sometimes just go downwind and take whatever port is on that trajectory. This is where the term safe harbor comes from, because when weather's bad, any harbor is better than being at sea. So from a fisherman's perspective, every port, whether they're large or small, is important. We have preferences, though. And the main reason that we have preferences is because of bars. I understand that some people here may not be familiar with the term crossing a bar, but in the Pacific Northwest, understanding that term can be a matter of life or death. The bar is a term that's used for where a hump is formed in the entrance to the harbor from the downstream sediment that drops when it comes up against the swells and tides of the ocean. During ebb tides, the river water speeds up and narrows at that hump and creates the pressure against the incoming swells. Those swells build and steepen and tip over and become breakers. And that's where the term a breaking bar comes from. Now, I didn't understand until I started coming back here and talking with people here that breaking bars are a pretty much unique condition relative to the rest of the coast. In the Pacific Northwest, every bar is a breaking bar at one time or another. I couldn't really understand until I figured that out, that why all of these small ports budgets were zeroed out year after year, budget after budget, administration after administration. And now I know. So I want to help you understand how important bar dredging is in the Pacific Northwest. Now, there are a couple of ways to minimize the threat of a breaking bar. One is to build jetties that steer the current of the river a few degrees off of the dominant swell. And that's been done many, many decades ago all over the Pacific Northwest. But because of lack of funding, most of those jetties are in disrepair and are becoming more and more dangerous and less effective. Another way to minimize the deadliness of breaking bars is to dredge that hump that I referred to. Every year, sediment coming downstream comes up against the swell where the river broadens out, drops that sediment that's caused by the heavy rains that are typical and characterize the Pacific Northwest coast. Now, there's one thing that both of these methods have in common, and that is funding. And the Portland District of the Army Corps of Engineers does a great job dredging our navigation channels and taking care of things given the resources. But when insufficient funding is provided, as is often the case for small ports, the bars shallow, breaks, and lives are lost. The reason lives are lost is because when those breakers are happening, a boat transiting that breaking bar, comes up against a freak wave or a sneaker wave, and that's bigger and faster than the rest of the waves, and the boat basically turns into a surfboard, loses control, and literally rolls over. And many deaths happen because of this. In Oregon, there are 15 communities with small ports. In every one of those communities, the port is the equivalent of an anchor business. Everybody sitting at this table understands that. In the Port of Bandon in 2014, we did a study, commissioned a study that found that $62 million of economic benefit is generated annually as a result of our access to sea that's maintained by the port dredging. Operation and maintenance of our nation's navigation infrastructure is a federal responsibility. However, chronic underfunding for ports and large and small, is causing our water infrastructure to deteriorate, impacting safety and reducing America's competitiveness. I've been encouraged by the recent efforts in Congress to ensure that all the monies paid into the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund every year is used to fund the Corps of Engineers. However, we from small ports are concerned that this will not happen quickly enough. Many of our nation's ports may have long since silted in by the time that money is made available. Again, I appreciate this opportunity to talk with you. And I know it might be hard to understand, but if everything you have is wrapped up in your boat and your boat feeds your family, you go fishing. And even when everything is optimal, some of us don't make it home. And I'm just here to ask you to give us the best chance you can that we can make it in and home to our families.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Gaucher. That was very informational. What we're going to do is have 5-minute sessions here of asking questions, and then if there's a desire for more for a second round, we can do that. Let me start off, General Semonite. You know, you've been before this committee several times. We've been listening to the president, and we've been listening to him during his, not just the administration now, but when he was campaigning, talking about a very ambitious infrastructure program. And I'd like to ask you, have you had conversations either with the president or with members of the administration concerning any of the details of what the plans are from his perspective?
Yes, sir. I think, first of all, the most important thing of those discussions has been a theme that all of you have already said, and that is that many Americans think of infrastructure as roads, airfields, bridges. We need to continue to expand that dialogue to talk about coastal ports and inland waterways. And so there is, we have had several questions from the administration to my staff asking specifically what are some things that are some significant challenges that you're faced with on budgetary issues, and where could there be some of those projects that would be well served by additional infrastructure funding. I think the other thing, though, is the administration is very interested in potential for private-public partnerships. And so we've been asked a lot of questions about what would be some of the studies or cases of how you could see where a public-private partnership could take some of that burden off of the taxpayers. I think the third area that we have asked questions is they said, are there some things when it comes to processes or procedures where we can unencumber you and allow you to continue to do your job perhaps in a manner that might be a little bit more efficient and effective? So working through the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works, we have provided answers to some of those questions. We don't know any outputs right now. We have mainly been in a provide mode, and we don't know exactly where that's going to end up.
Yeah, I think it's important that the public knows that these conversations are taking place. I've had a few conversations. Also, I know that this committee is going to be a very busy committee. You might remember in one of your earlier appearances in reference to the Tulsa district, we had that rather unpleasant experience with a senior employee statement from the Corps of Engineers that made the statement, quote, if it were up to me, there'd be no lake development, unquote. I want you to get in the record right now your response to that statement.
So, sir, I think I'll say the same thing I said last month. The Corps of Engineers certainly sees a very active role for private-public partnerships, and with respect to our recreation facilities and some of those numbers that I gave you, we would continue to endorse those. Yeah. If there was a member of my staff who felt that that is not appropriate, then that's on me, and I'll fix that. Yeah. I do think it's important to clarify, though, that there are some very specific examples where the appropriate procedures by the private vendor were not followed. And as a result, based on our procedures, we had to request the right information. For instance, design, permitting, that kind of stuff. So there could be some frustration with a very specific cases that come up on these.
Yes, that statement doesn't fit those circumstances, however. And speaking of that, Mr. Humphreys, in your testimony, you talk about the difficulty in navigating the various permitting processes with the Corps of Engineers. Are there any examples other than what you used in your opening statement that you'd like to share with us?
Sure. Right now we're going through a process on private land that extends into the lake. And so it's not part of the Corps' property, but it is affected by a flowage easement. And so the Corps has the right to flood our private property. And we're trying to put a waterfront park into this area. And so doing some erosion control and a swim beach and then a performance lawn. And this is the front lawn of Carlton Landing. It's a place that we have been wanting to see built out from the beginning. We ran into an issue where there is a 602 line is the elevation where you can develop down to that land and not have to worry about flood risk. Below that, we didn't realize that there's also a 585 line, which is the top of the conservation pool. We've been working on this project for several months, and it had to go through the local office to get to the Tulsa office into the regulatory office before we understood that just a couple feet that we were wanting to do some impact and stabilization of the erosion control of the bank below 585 was going to bump us into a general permit, adding 4 to 6 months onto the process. And so that was something where had we known the lay of the land from a regulation standpoint at the very beginning of the process, it could have been avoided.
I think that's good. And there's not time to give the examples that are out there, but it's a bureaucratic problem. And I think everyone up here knows that, and everyone at the table down there knows that. So anything for the record that we can get from any of the witnesses would be very helpful for us to have while time is somewhat limited during the course of these questions. Senator Cardin.
I want to thank all of our witnesses. I found your testimony to be very helpful. And General Semonite, I certainly support in the appropriate manner leveraging the best that we can between public-private partnerships. but I also acknowledge the tremendous return we get from the public investment. The multiplier effect is as high as I understand 22 to 1 on economic benefits and 7 to 1 in revenues that are generated to the U.S. Treasury. So it's a good investment. And I want to get to the point that Secretary Ron made, and that is that because of the backlog of projects and the limited amount of monies that are appropriated, there's delays. And those delays could very well cause projects that have previously been authorized not to be funded within the time restrictions and could jeopardize those projects being done at all. I take it that what we're facing in Maryland is not untypical as to what's happening around the rest of the country.
Sir, that's right. And I think, though, it's more important to be able to make sure we understand the national ramifications of some of these projects that don't get done. So I'll talk about this particular one, Mid-Bay Island. I was a division commander in New York, and we actually championed Mid-Bay as we went through the Civil Works Review process back in 07 and 08. There's great potential there. The challenge is that if we don't find a place to put dredge material, a strategic long-term plan, these harbors and ports will continue to have more and more challenges. Baltimore is going to run out of land to put dredge material somewhere around 2027 based on current conditions. That could be off a year or two. And the question is, if we don't find it on the shores of the land, and that's hard because land development and condominiums and everything else are taking the shores, if we don't do it inside the water when the sediment is okay to be able to dump inside the water, or if we don't build islands like Mid-Bay, we don't have any other options. And so all the benefits that this committee's talked about on the economic piece, we've got to find some solution to be able to solve these issues.
Yeah, I thank you for that, and that's why Congress authorized Mid-Bay in 2014, because we recognized the lead time was necessary. We still had capacity at Poplar Island. We still had other capacity for dredge material, but we knew that if we didn't start that ball rolling, we would run out of capacity. And Mr. Chairman, I remember coming to Congress many years ago with battles on where you're going to be able to put dredge material, and it was politically impossible to find a location in the Baltimore region to put dredge material. And then my predecessor, Senator Sarbanes, came up with Poplar Island, and it became a win-win-win situation. It's now an environmentally restoration project, returning wetlands and species to the Chesapeake, and the location for a significant amount of dredge material. But that's running near its capacity. We still have some time left, and that's why Mid-Bay. So, Secretary Ron, can you just tell me just where we are in regards to Mid-Bay and how important it is that stay on track from the point of view of being authorized for the Army Corps and funded?
Absolutely, Senator. So where we are as far as Mid-Bay, and as you've mentioned how important it is, the plan right now is that Mid-Bay would be coming on as Poplar Island, which is incredibly popular with the public as this great facility that people go out to see wildlife and enjoy the area. As it is being filled to its capacity, we need another place to go, and that's been designated as Mid-Bay. The issues right now is that there had been a DMMP ordered by the Corps to study placement of dredge materials. That has been going on now, I believe, since 2011. It should be completed hopefully sometime this summer. And at that point, once we have an approved plan, then it has to go to headquarters for approval from the Corps of Engineers headquarters, and then it has to be funded. And so all of those things have to occur. But right now, we're fairly confident about approval of the DMMP plan. So the critical pieces are approval out of the Corps headquarters, and then funding. And we need to start with that. We need to continue with that to make sure that the country continues to benefit from the productivity of the Baltimore port.
And if it's not on, if it doesn't stay on schedule and it's not ready, we run out of capacity. Does that mean that we jeopardize the ability to have the width and depth in our channels that are necessary for the commercial activities?
Oh, it absolutely does.
That got the ball rolling. We just heard that the Deputy Attorney General started taking a hard look at this about 2 weeks ago. And that's about the time when those subpoenas were issued. So I think we need to know that, because I want to say one other thing about this. There would have been very, very careful consideration at the presidential level with the Justice Department, with the Attorney General, with the Deputy Attorney General about whether this was wise or not. Donald Trump has a very good feel for the American public. He knew this was going to cause a firestorm. He absolutely knows that. We should dismiss the idea that it's caught him totally by surprise. But he had to have decided it's worth the firestorm to get rid of the guy. I'll write it out because I have to get rid of the guy. And that is what makes it so suspicious.
I totally agree with David that Donald Trump has his finger on the pulse of the American people, or at least the people who support him, and he got him elected. No question. But he's also an impulsive person. And how many stories have I heard, have you heard, have probably all heard, of him blowing up about something and saying, let's just get rid of him, or let's get rid of that, or forget it, or let's just make this happen. And the question is, did that happen? And if that happened, did somebody say, hold on a second?
No.
This is not the way, it's not just firing. I mean, you know, Preet Bharara was a red flag at the U.S. Attorney's Office. Sally Yates was she defied the president. That was in many ways kind of understandable that he didn't want her there. This is a whole different ballgame. And the question, as we begin to report this out and learn more about what happened behind the scenes, is did somebody stand up and say, whoa, 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 this is potentially, you know, seismic and a huge, huge problem. And it hasn't been done since Richard Nixon.
I want to speak to David's point, maybe ask David this question, which is, you say this is carefully planned and this is how these things go down. My question is, was it carefully planned that he was out of town? Was it carefully planned that he was speaking in California, that he was not in his office? They knew his schedule. He wasn't here. Didn't happen at the FBI when he was there. Would that be something that people would be thinking about when they would do this?
There's a reason the Saturday Night Massacre was on a Saturday night.
Well, right.
Archibald Cox wasn't in the office.
Well, I think that becomes a matter of speculation. I just want to say a couple things. Democrats right now are scrambling. They recognize that there's an opportunity to do something. We're now hearing that Democrats are saying they're going to block any appointment of anybody to replace Comey until there is a special prosecutor appointed. You're going to see a massive show of resistance from Democrats, both congressionally and otherwise. People see this as a real threat. I think we've taken a step away from rule of law toward the rule of a small group of people. And I also want to say that as a result of that, I feel vindicated, because I said that Donald Trump had become president, and he has become president, President Nixon. This is an abuse of authority. It's an abuse of power. It's contempt for our institutions, and I feel vindicated tonight.
Can I just say that I play a little game sometimes, which is I insert Hillary Clinton's name into scenarios. And if she were president of the United States, I bet Attorney General Cuccinelli, you might be the one hyperventilating if she made such a move. And I will tell you this as well. I think, again, as a former Attorney General, it's very surprising to me that you think the test is what comes next and who he appoints. By the way, what basis of confidence is it that he's going to appoint somebody with a sterling reputation to the FBI? We don't see any basis of him doing that. When you don't judge the original act, the firing of the FBI director at the time of a major investigation into potentially him and his administration. His own attorney general saw fit to recuse himself, but you don't have any problem with that. It's really surprising.
Well, that's, of course, BS. We do have evidence. And the most important appointment he has made as president was Neil Gorsuch, an absolutely unimpeachable choice. The burden is, as I said earlier, on the president on this next selection. I would agree on two process points, stepping aside from the substance for a moment. Dana said earlier, this isn't the way you handle this with somebody like James Comey. I agree completely. It was terribly mishandled. I would secondarily agree that it was completely mismanaged within the White House, and that's on Reince Priebus primarily. Chief of Staff is supposed to prepare for this, to manage that team. And this is not the first time that kind of mismanagement has happened on something big in the White House.
I appreciate you saying that, and I think it's important that we try to find some kind of common ground. I just want to ask you another question around common ground.
right now, we are seeing the benefits over the last 8 or 9 months, given the large ships that are making their way into the port. We can see that continuing. We expect that to grow. That cannot occur if the channel itself is filling in both from depth and width. And of course, if we have a major storm that comes up the bay, we will lose the capacity of the channel much sooner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Oh, I think Senator Shelby. No, I was here. Thank you. Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for appearing here today. And General Semonite, thank you very much. It's really good to see you again. And given the topic of today's hearing, of course, I'd like to continue the conversation that we've been having regarding the Cedar Rapids flood risk management project. And what I'd like to do is just share with everyone here today, those on the committee, and of course, those of you on the panel and in the audience, that the September 2016 floods, which impacted Cedar Rapids, where the Cedar River crested at a level second only to the 2008 500-year flood event, caused Cedar Rapids to lose $26 million in sales and production due to being essentially shut down for an entire week when they were evacuated due to the floods. And as I have mentioned to you before, the city of Cedar Rapids is our second largest city, and its success is critical to the entire economic well-being of the state of Iowa. Now, there are products that Cedar Rapids produces and manufactures that have domestic and global impacts, just to share with everyone. For example, breakfast cereal manufacturers in Cedar Rapids produce 13% of total U.S. output. Industry in Cedar Rapids also processes as much as 19% of the global oat crop in value-added manufacturing per year. Wet corn milling in Cedar Rapids accounts for 8% of U.S. domestic ethanol production, and the quantity of corn processed each year in Cedar Rapids exceeds the size of the domestic corn crop of Canada, the Republic of South Africa, or the Russian Federation. That's a lot of corn, folks. These are all products and goods that at some point or another rely on the core infrastructure to move. And with that being said, I did notice a couple of provisions that I mentioned to you earlier in the omnibus explanatory statement for the Corps that I think could apply to a community like Cedar Rapids. There seems to be new provisions in the Corps work plan that requires you to provide Congress with more descriptions of the rating systems used to evaluate projects and explain why certain projects were considered as being less competitive. I also saw the provision that said, in quotes, administration budget metrics shall not be a reason to disqualify a study or project from being funded. We think that's a great step forward. Can I take this as a sign that the Corps and the administration are looking to improve its system that calculates the economic benefits of flood control projects? And will you commit to continuing to work to make sure that we are able to move the Cedar Rapids flood mitigation project forward in fiscal year 2018?
Senator, thanks for that question, and you and I have talked several times on this, and we are in awe of the people of Cedar Rapids that were very heroic back in that flood fighting. That is not a position that we should put Americans into, to have to be able to fight for their lives. On the other hand, this is a project which unfortunately doesn't rise high when it comes to the current method for racking and stacking projects with respect to the benefit-cost ratio. So we are committed to do everything we can to continue to champion that project, and the Corps will certainly do that. I don't know exactly on how it's going to fall out in the rest of that process.
Well, we do have to continue pushing, because as I went through all of these different examples of what passes through Cedar Rapids on a daily basis, the impact to the economics of the state is pretty clear. And when you're comparing the cost of the property in Iowa, it's much lower than the cost of a property on the coastline. Of course, you've got great, big, beautiful $million-dollar homes, but that doesn't mean to a person living in Iowa that their home is worth any less to them. It's just based on what everybody else believes the value of a home is. So we do have to consider that. And just as a reminder, the assistance that Cedar Rapids needs from the Corps is just 3% of the cost of damages that it went through in 2008. So we need to continue pushing this issue. I look forward to more conversations with you in the future and a way forward for the people of Cedar Rapids. Thanks, you, General.
Thank you, Senator Ernst. Senator Merkley.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to focus for a moment on the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund. In 2016, the amount spent was 80% of the incoming receipts. In 2017, that fell to 55% of the receipts. If we had spent, my question for you, General, is if we had spent all of the receipts from 2017, do you have enough infrastructure projects that meritorious infrastructure projects for those funds?
Senator, there's clearly a very long list of requirements. So we definitely have, most of the time, more requirements than funds available.
And so the question I want to raise is these receipts that go into the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund are from the industry itself, from the shipping. Given the state of our jetties, given the state of our dredging, given the state of our locks and many lock doors, shouldn't we spend every dollar that comes in on maintenance of our water infrastructure?
Sir, I think that obviously a lot of different considerations go into the use of the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund. I would just continue to say that we will champion full use of that where possible. But as far as exactly how that is expended, there's obviously a lot of players there.
And thank you, General. It's appropriately diplomatically stated, and I appreciate the point that yes, there's plenty of infrastructure projects that need to be worked on. And Mr. Lyons, I believe that you said in your testimony that underinvestment in seaport channels and harbors and underfunding of the Corps' civil works programs result in inefficient channels and poorly maintained harbors, increasing costs for port users, reducing U.S. global competitiveness, exacerbating maintenance dredging backlog, all of which adversely impact the U.S. tax base and job market. Mr. Lyons, would you support using all of the Harbor Maintenance Trust funds to actually maintain and improve the infrastructure?
Yes, Senator, I would. I believe, as the General said, that there are plenty of projects out there. There are a lot of projects that are marginally maintained or not even maintained to their full authorized depths. We've got especially big problems up in the Great Lakes ports. Our harbor requires maintenance because we are fed by a river and river silt, and some years we have much more material to move than others, and there are years that we are very marginally able to take care of, and sometimes, you know, we have some delays where we have to experience a narrowed channel where we have to go to one-way traffic because the sides of the channel have filled up and they haven't been able to get to, they don't have sufficient funds to get to it. So, yes, I would absolutely support that.
Thank you. And Mr. Gaucher, when you're looking at the ports on the Oregon coast and we skip a year of dredging, in some of these ports that have rivers feeding them and silt coming down the river, is even skipping a single year sometimes problematic for the commerce and the safety of that community?
Absolutely, Senator. Case in point on the Rogue River, they missed a year of dredging, and it was a particularly wet year that year. And now it's going to cost way more than 2 years worth of dredging to get that caught up because it silted in so badly that now they can't go in with a regular core dredge. They're going to have to farm out the job with a different kind of dredge that uses a pipe to even get the core dredge in.
And this is like an extra $800,000, I believe, or something like that nature, just to get back to where you can do the normal project.
Correct.
And sometimes you have a situation where the not only is it boats coming in, but also the ability of the Coast Guard get out to do a rescue?
Yes, and that's the case once again on the Rogue, because I don't think they're going to be able to even get the Coast Guard to come in to help on this bad breaking bar, because the Coast Guard doesn't have enough depth to transit.
So you could easily find uses important to the economy and the safety of Oregon's coastal communities for spending some of the unspent Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund?
You bet.
Thank you so much for coming out from Oregon to share the perspective. And I really do appreciate the small port set aside, the 10% set aside. That's been so important to Oregon's coastal economy and something we need to keep doing for all of our smaller ports around the country.
Thank you, Senator Merkley. Senator Shelby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Semonite, you've had a lot of experience with the Corps before you got to your present position. We've been talking about the Panama Canal and its impact on shipping, its relevance to deeper ports in the Gulf and so forth. Tell us how important the modernization of the Panama Canal is and what impact it will have or should have on all of our ports, but especially the Gulf ports.
Senator, I was there at the opening of the Panama Canal. I saw the first ship come through, and I was amazed at the amount of volume that came through. And as several of you have said, I mean, the economic impact, what that's going to do, both on the economy, the GDP, I think that's off the table on how much impact that will have.
Would you call it a game changer as far as shipping?
I think it's a game changer, yes, sir.
A game changer now and in the future.
And if you don't then have the ability to receive those, and not every single port will take the big ships without a doubt, but if you don't have the second and third order effect to be able to take the roll-on down, then that will limit us, I think, on our ability to be able to continue to expand internationally.
It will hurt our trade overall, will it not?
It'll certainly have an impact, sir.
Okay, if a port is say 45 feet, 46 feet or 45 feet, and some of the ships need 50 feet or close to it, and if they can't put a full load in there, it's not efficient, is it?
Certainly not, Senator. That means they've got a light load.
It's like flying an airplane, a freighter, an airplane, and because of the runway or because of the distance and so forth, you can't deal with it. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So it is a game changer, is it not?
It definitely is, and if a port is not of the right size, that means that particular part of the country that can't receive that boat, that ship, then therefore industry is going to go where they can find the best return on investment.
Mr. Lyons, the Port of Mobile, as I understand it, is 45 feet. Is that right?
That is correct. It's 45 now.
And it's been authorized to go to 55 feet by law, right?
Yes, it was authorized in the 1986 water bill.
And it's also needs to be widened, is that right? Where two ships can move and they can move them around?
Yes, our current channel is only 400 feet wide, and when we have ships that are exceeding 140-foot beam, we're restricted to one-way traffic, and as I mentioned in my remarks, we have a lot of wide-bodied tankers coming in that are 150, 160 feet wide. We have now post-Panamax container ships in, so we're one-way traffic there. Ships have to wait. Ships are expensive. It's costing money. That's eventually affecting the cost structure of these ships when they have to build delays into, and we have them, they occur multiple times every week.
Right now, you mentioned your container freight has gone up tremendously, has it not? Your business.
Yes, Senator. We're a relatively new container port. We only opened our container terminal in 2008. We had prior to that been a bulk port and handled forest products and coal and steel and products like that. But manufacturing in the Southeast has changed significantly. Retail distribution is beginning to realize that they cannot be totally reliant upon the West Coast and East Coast to efficiently move at all times. So they're looking for alternate gateways. This is why Walmart selected Mobile for this 2.6 million square foot international distribution center, one of 6 big ones that Walmart has in the country. So as alternate gateways, well, we have the bigger ships coming, and it is important.
And a lot more container freight.
A lot more. Our container terminal grew 19% last year.
Oh, I know you don't have a map. I wish you had a big map here to share with the committee and the people of where Mobile is located geographically, where the Panama Canal is, and the proximity as the crow flies go through the Panama Canal and you look right up the Gulf and you got a straight shot just about to the Port of Mobile, do you not?
It's a straight shot, and we have grown. Like I said, we're an infant, if you would, container port, but we now have 3 ships a week, every week, with fixed day that come through the Panama Canal. And one of those shipping lines is going to the larger post-Panamax ships this year. Next year, the other 2 lines will go to post-Panamax, and I feel confident that next year we'll add a 4th line coming from Asia. So the Asian trade in Panama is very important to our port and country.
General, since you know a lot about Panama and all the core and the ports, can you share with us your vision of where the Panama Canal is, where it comes through the nation of Panama, and where it lines up as far as the Port of Mobile is concerned, as the crow flies, is, a direct line?
Senator, there's clearly a proximity issue that Mobile has that some other places don't have the advantage of. And just so you know, that GRR you mentioned, we're right on schedule now to have that done by November of 19. We're putting about $8 million into that, and we don't see any significant problems with getting that done. So then if the Congress finds that to have it on the priority, then that will be well postured to be able to be deepened.
A 55-foot channel and the width or wider channel would be a game changer for the Port of Mobile too, would it not?
It would, sir, and again, the actual depth, we don't know that. That'll be the result of what the study will come out, so I won't commit on what the depth would be.
We know. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Shelby. Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for convening today's hearing, and I want to thank our witnesses for participating in this very important conversation. General Semonite, as you know, our inland waterways system is a critically important component of our nation's freight network, as we've been discussing, and a barometer for gauging for the health of the Midwest region, environmental and native species. The rivers surrounding and traversing Illinois provide enormous economic and recreational benefits, and I believe Congress must prioritize the effective management and protection of these resources, the river system. Would you agree with this?
Yes, Senator, I would.
So as you know, the McCook Reservoir is approximately 91% complete. It prevents over $114 million in annual damages to the Chicagoland area and carries a benefit to cost ratio of 2.96, which is a very high score for an Army Corps project. Will you pledge that the Corps will work closely with my office, Senator Durbin, and the Illinois delegation to complete the project on schedule, including fiscal year 17 funding, so we can avoid the type of damages we have suffered over the last 3 disaster declarations?
So, Senator, we see great merit in this. This is a life safety issue. This is a flood risk management project. Clearly, the majority of that first half is all done and works very, very well. We will continue to champion that reservoir, whatever we can, to get appropriate funding.
Thank you. I recognize that there may be other agencies pressuring the Corps to abandon this critical project as it approaches the finish line. I just want to make it clear that it is unacceptable to leave my constituents at risk, especially when we're so close to finishing. You know, stage 2 of the reservoir started securing funding over 10 years ago, and we're just asking to finish the job.
And Senator, we don't see any significant other challenges with other interagency. We feel very firm that that is a very smart project to finish.
That's wonderful. Good news. Thank you. General, when it comes to combating invasive species threatening the Great Lakes, Illinois may face the most daunting challenge in the need to effectively stop and control the Asian carp without significantly disrupting inland waterways operations and harming our economy. It's a real balancing act. I believe we can achieve these two objectives, and I was very interested in reviewing the findings of the Brandon Road Lock and Dam study, along with the subsequent public comments and alternatives, to inform our efforts to develop an effective solution. It's why I and many other Great Lakes stakeholders are deeply disappointed and surprised by the Army Corps' decision to indefinitely delay the release of this critical plan, a reversal that was carried out with not much transparency or explanation. It was widely reported, in fact, that this decision was a result of outside pressure from the White House. Will you explain why the report was delayed and provide us with an updated timeline for its release?
Senator, so you know that report was completed by us, was prepared to go out for public comment. I do not know the details of what the cause of us being put on hold for that report, but we will hold until we are advised to go ahead and release that report. That is something we are following guidance.
Okay, where's that guidance coming from?
All I know is it's coming from my higher headquarters, which is the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works out of the Department of Army, and I can't elaborate as to where it would be above that. I just don't know.
Okay, so I need to reach out to the Assistant Secretary for the Army.
I would think that would be the best answer, ma'am.
Okay, because I do think that it's very important to move this forward so that we can have some sort of a plan in place. Earlier this year, I joined several of my Great Lakes colleagues in both the House and Senate to highlight our concerns about the Corps' economic re-evaluation of the Sioux Locks project. Rather than calculating the transportation rate savings for this project based on traditional methods used by the Corps for other lock projects, it was our understanding that the Corps decided to use unique alternative modes of transportation, never before used by the Corps, by which to base its conclusions. The February 21st letter, which I asked unanimous consent, Mr. Chairman, for it to be entered into the record, asked the Corps to calculate the Sioux Locks project economic benefits in a manner consistent with other Corps lock project evaluations. Will you commit to us today that the Corps will do this and that you will finish the reevaluation within the Corps' 2-year schedule?
Senator, I do not know exactly the particulars of that one, and I'm not prepared to answer that today on Sioux Lock. Sioux Lock is very, very important to this nation. We see national security issues in there. It's an old lock. We've got to get Sioux Lock prepared. I don't know exactly the details you're talking about, and I have to get back with you.
Okay, we'll follow up with you on that. Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and really appreciate the testimony. Gentlemen, today is very important. Commissioner Ghosh, I really appreciate your testimony as a senator who represents thousands and thousands of fishermen and communities with small ports. Your testimony was particularly compelling. And I want to kind of shift the focus a little bit more north, where I'm from. You know, General, we have a lot of interest in the Arctic right now. I think a lot of people are waking up to that. As a matter of fact, the Arctic Council is having a ministerial in Fairbanks, Alaska, starting tomorrow, 2 days in Alaska. All foreign ministers of the Arctic nations are going to be up there. And you may have seen in the NDAA, there was a requirement for the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of Homeland Security to designate a strategic Arctic port, given our increasing interest in the Arctic, in shipping, traffic, natural resources, search and rescue, protecting the environment. So there's a lot going on up there. I want to talk to you about two ports. I know we're looking at all kinds of ports, but first the port of Nome. And as you probably know, the Corps has had over 100-year history in Nome, Alaska. And there was a focus on the deepwater port draft study, and then there's been some back and forth after Shell left Alaska on the oil and gas exploration. But there was 2 additional WRDA provisions just this past bill, the Wind Act, that came into law in December. So can you commit to us now to, and those were actually designed to help get the Corps focused again on Nome, that you can commit to having Nome as part of your work plan moving forward and getting moving forward again on the deep draft port study and work that was ongoing until we had the hiccup of some of those oil and gas issues.
So, Senator Sullivan, thanks for the question. We are actively working NOAA right now. The study was put on hold pending coordination with DOD and Homeland Security based on WRDA 16. The benefit cost ratio is below 1%, so I think that's why there was a request.
But there's also provisions in the WRDA bill that essentially said you have an entire other areas to look at, particularly, for example, in the bill, in the law now, NOAA services 54 different communities throughout western Alaska and the Nome area. That gives you authority to kind of take another hard look.
Yes, sir. So we have sent letters out to both the Navy Department, DOD Navy, and Homeland Security to be able to make sure that we understand where their potential use might be. We're waiting for those responses back, and I can certainly get with you offline and tell you what we hear from that. Be able to see if, in fact, there is an additional reason from both of them to be able to expand the Port of Nome.
Okay, I would like to get offline with you because there's two specific provisions in the WRDA bill, again, just signed into law, that are very focused on that are intended, and I know we worked with your staff on the language to get the Corps moving again. And so if there's delays, I need to understand why there's delays when the law has been changed to actually get the Corps to move out on this issue.
We are working implementation guidance to be able to see. Now, I think the best thing I need to do is I'll come see you, Senator. Okay. I'll lay this out, and then I'm not exactly aware of the two extra provisions you're talking about right now. The information I've got is that we're waiting for a response back from the two departments as to what would be a strategic rationale to be able to have NOAA, not necessarily what you're talking about. So let me, I'll come back.
So the NDAA is a different issue.
Yes, sir. Let me come back and I'll get with you and we'll lay this out and walk our way through this.
Good, thank you. Let me ask about another area or another potential port in the area. What is the Corps' view of the effectiveness of possibly using public-private partnerships for the development of Port Spencer, which is actually also in the area?
Senator, I don't know on Spencer. We are, again, very interested in anything with a P3. The challenge is how do we put together the right package to be able to continue to be able to make it through the system. So if we get together, I'll certainly lay out Spencer for you as well.
Great. And then Section 119 of the WIN Act amends the law related to the territorial partial cost share waiver to add federally recognized Indian tribes as entities eligible for a limited waiver of local cost sharing for Army Corps studies and projects. Can you give me a sense of the Corps' timing on that new provision and how you're looking at it? The District of Alaska has a lot of interest, as you know, on that provision, and we'd welcome your engagement.
So, Senator, we support this as well. I'm sorry, we support this as well. This is for cost share of the first $450,000, mainly for Native American tribes. This is something that we will do. We're writing through exactly what the implementation guidance is to be able to say, here's how you would then qualify for that. But those tribes that don't have enough money to be able to come into a study, we don't think they should be disadvantaged. Yeah. So we support that. We just got to get the details together so we can put it on the street and people know how to apply for that.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Sullivan. Senator Cardin and I would like to make a few more comments, maybe even actually have another round in case some other members come who have not yet been here. First of all, General Semonite, one of the reasons that I brought this up and wanted to get in the record again on this in terms of the late development is just to make sure that everybody understands that this is legitimate. It's here. In fact, I remember the first one, I think, was in Oklahoma, and Georgia was immediately following that. The Corps actually got into that business, and that's been a long time ago. But I wanted to mention another thing, too, that has really concerned me for so long, and that is this Montgomery Lock and Dam. As you come down the Mississippi River, and you're familiar with it, I'm sure some of the others aren't, you actually have two rivers. Well, it was called the Three River Project. And if you take the distance from the Mississippi all the way across Arkansas and through Oklahoma, that's 445 miles that would be completely done away with and useless if we can't ultimately find the solution to this Montgomery. Are we waiting now for what they refer to as the Three Rivers Study?
Senator, I'm going to have to get back with you on that. There are several projects that we're looking to continue to champion, but I don't know exactly where we're at on that particular one.
Yeah, well, Senator Bozeman and I, we don't need to take the time of the whole panel here, but we're very much interested in that. And that has been a problem. Montgomery Point, Lock and Dam, and the depth issue for a long, long time. So why don't we set up something and either get the two of us together with you and see if we can't come to some determination. Sound reasonable?
Sounds great, sir.
All right, and Mr. Humphreys, in the opening statement, we talked about the development, like your development, what it means to surrounding communities, what it means to the economy, what it means, what benefits are there that people might not think about, because I know there are great benefits. Would you share your thoughts on that?
I'd be happy to. When we look at a project like Carlton Landing, we're in a rural area of Oklahoma that is seeing economy shift to the urban areas. You've got great natural beauty, but you don't have a lot of drivers. So first and foremost, we provide jobs. In the construction industry, construction activity alone, we'll typically have about 125 to 150 trades on site in Carlton Landing, with the same number at any given time working off-site in sales, logistics, and support. In terms of economic impact, over the longer term, we expect to see over $2 billion of private investment in Carlton Landing as the master plan is built out. And so we expect Carlton Landing to be one of the more important economic development projects for Lake Eufaula, for Southeast Oklahoma, and also the growth of the Oklahoma tourism industry. I'm happy to serve on our state's tourism commission, and we think that long-term Carlton Landing could help bring dollars from outside of the Oklahoma, cross state lines back into the Oklahoma tourism business. Since our project's a new community, it's not just a subdivision. We also enhance the quality of life of people that live in that area. We have the state's first rural charter school, and about 80% of the kids that are attending our charter school in Carlton Landing come from outside of Carlton Landing, some driving as far as 30 minutes away. And so these are kids that, some come from strong families, but some come from situations where their parents are incarcerated or they're in the foster care system, and we're bringing them in and we're giving them a new opportunity to look and see life with new options. And so we're excited about that. But all this together, we see development activity and community building as something that has tangible and intangible benefits, monetary, and a lot of benefits to folks' quality of life that you just can't put a number to. So.
Would you say that this, a very similar situation in terms of benefits is true up there with your neighboring development up on Skytube?
Yeah.
That is really done some really great things.
Well, you see the growth of the property values from the time of the beginning of the public-private partnership to what they've realized currently. You've seen just a great growth where private investments coming in, and like I said in my comments earlier, we just need to set the table. There's some policy procedures that need to take place that help developers understand the regulatory landscape. I had an opportunity to speak with General Semonite before, and we'll give our recommendations on things that they could do with the existing regulations, and just educating and laying out a game plan so that people understand what the process looks like to work with the court.
You've done a successful operation there, and you've spread a lot of goodwill and helped to a lot of people.
Thank you, sir.
I noticed that we stalled just long enough to keep us open until Senator Markey got here, and so we'll recognize him.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I arrived first to praise Caesar, and I thank you for the WRDA bill from 2014, because in that bill there was $216 million for the Boston Harbor deepening project. so that we could accommodate the new super ships coming through the Panama Canal. And then I thank you for last year's WRDA bill, because then we added another $16 million to deal with additional complicating but necessary features that had to be built in. So we thank you for both of that. That's, a perfect example of the way the committee operated under your leadership on all of those issues. And so there's no construction yet, though, because there's no actual money yet up there. So, General, can I get your commitment that you would work with us to try to telescope the time frame that it's going to take in order for us to get the funding for that critically essential project for Boston? Because without it, we're going to be a port that is not able to fully benefit from this change.
So, Senator Markey, thanks for the question. I was a division commander in New York when we started that project back in '07. There's a lot of value in that project. Clearly, the 17 budget is on the street, but the 17 work plan is not, and the 18 budget will come out in a couple of weeks, so it's premature for me to talk about where that's at. Congress has given us new starts that we can allocate that. So I think as soon as we see where that plays out in the next couple of weeks, we'll certainly be able to advise you on Boston Harbor. But it is one of those projects that we certainly see merit into it. The question is going to be, where does it fall on the actual prioritized list of what is allocated money?
But you know it well, though, that project.
I know that project well, sir.
Yeah, I think that's going to be very helpful going online, so I thank you for that. And Secretary Ron, do we need more direct federal spending to ensure America's ports can remain competitive in this new era?
The answer is obviously yes. We have to. We have neglected infrastructure across the board for decades. And the answer is that yes, we have to invest more. And frankly, I'm confused as to why we haven't, since infrastructure has always seemed to have been one of those things that both parties could agree to, and that was always critical to our national well-being. So the answer is yes, we need additional federal funds. Even just in Maryland, we have substantial needs that go well beyond the Mid-Bay project. We, as a country that is so integrated into the global economy, we need all of these assets that allow us to link in. And in Maryland, we are very much linked into that global economy. We have needs for the next phase of construction at our Poplar Island project. We have needs at our C&D canal. And so there's so much there that we as a state do not have the capacity to address and frankly require federal investment to make that happen.
Thank you. And I thank you. I thank everyone for all of their great work in this area. And it's the obligation of the members of the Senate to assist the communities which we represent who are adversely affected by sea level rise, climate change, to adapt to the new reality. And that's why I've supported environmentally responsible shoreline protection projects where sand is pumped onto beaches to protect against storm surge and coastal erosion. In fact, the Army Corps was just so great on Revere Beach and Winthrop in helping us to solve those problems after the hurricane snowstorm. In the town of Sandwich, General, in Massachusetts, it attempted to use sand from the federal Cape Cod Canal that otherwise would be dumped into the ocean to protect their town, and federal requirements became a major obstacle. The Army Corps required the homeowners to provide easements ceding away their coastal property line forever, even though the sand from this beneficial use project would only remain on the beach for 5 years. And ultimately, the town was unable to use federal funding for this essential shoreline protection project. So can I just ask, General, do Do you believe it's reasonable for the Army Corps to require property owners to provide easements in perpetuity for beneficial use projects if the sand is only going to last for a few years? Wouldn't it be more appropriate for the easement to last as long as that sand remains on the beach, just as a kind of a practical way of dealing with the issue?
So, Senator, two things. I don't know the details of Sandwich. I'm very aware of the sand easement issue all throughout Sandy in about 7 different states. I'm not sure I've ever been asked the question of how long should an easement last, and it should be correlated back to the sand. We can certainly have that dialogue. I think what we are currently doing is following the policy that we've been very consistent on, is that if, in fact, federal dollars are going to put sand on a beach, then normally those landowners have to be able to provide access back to, for the local people to be able to get to the beach.
Yeah. So I would just like to be able to work with the Army Corps on striking a balance, especially if that sand is, once again, just going to be washed away.
We're always looking at options, sir.
Yeah, and thank you. Thank you, General. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you and the ranking member for holding this hearing. This really is an important thing that as we go forward and try and figure out some of our infrastructure problems. General, I was just visiting with Senator Inhofe and had heard the comment about the Three Rivers situation that we have in Arkansas where the White River hits the Mississippi and stuff. I just want to reemphasize how important that project is. That's one of those things that it's not an if, it's a when. It's going to fail, and probably you know, up to a year as far as, you know, shutting down the Arkansas River, which would be a real problem for Arkansas and Oklahoma, but really the whole nation in the sense of being able to move goods and services.
Senator, can I give a quick update there? I wasn't fast enough when Senator Imhoff asked me, but basically we completed, and this is on the Three River study, we did complete the alternatives milestone meeting in December 15. The tentative plan was completed in 17. Right now we've released the draft report for policy, public and agency technical review. That was last April. And then right now we're looking at milestone decision scheduled for July of 17. We're working our way through this. We think a Civil Works Review Board is scheduled right now for March of 18 and a Chiefs report in June of 18. So that's the current milestone. That is pretty aggressive, but we do think there's great merit that we want to continue to stay on timeline. And this has continued to get funding 15, 16, 17. Obviously premature to talk about 18, but we continue to see a lot of value in that.
Good, and we appreciate that and appreciate you pushing forward. Like I say, that's a matter of if and not when. In Oklahoma and Arkansas, we're experiencing these 500-year floods about every 2 years, and they really are playing havoc. The waterways have held up fairly well. This last one has really caused a lot of damage, but we're in the process of working through that with you. Apart from that, there is a lot of concern in the sense with taxpayers, Congress, about the inefficiency in the delivery of our infrastructure investments. Projects that should reasonably be completed in a few years typically last decades, delaying public benefits and exponentially increasing cost. How, if at all, can public-private partnerships help accelerate the delivery and create better value as far as the infrastructure? Do you have any ideas in the sense that would public-private partnerships, would that help with that situation?
Senator, it definitely would, and I'll just give you a quick data point here. What it really does is it allows to put all of the funding up front. So as opposed to dragging that over whatever the time that we would be able to afford it through the federal government, we're able to see that upfront investment. So I'll just give you the numbers that I use, and these are very, very simple numbers, but the one federal P3 study that we've been able to push through, which is Fargo-Moorhead, if you do it the regular way, it'd take us 16 years. The way we're doing it up there is 6.5 years.
Since you say that, that's probably 20 or,
It could be, but I just wanted to give you a data point.
So what, give me the 16 years versus.
16 versus 6.5.
Yeah.
The federal share, the regular way would have been $850 million. The P3 way is $450 million. And then the other big thing, the regular way would have been up to probably 28 contracts. The P3 way is 11. So just remember those numbers. I mean, you're probably half of what the normal process is. The challenge we've got to do, and we've got to get the whole team to be able to be synchronized as to how can we then enable P3. There's a lot of people that do big hand waves to say that P3's got merit, but we've got to be able to make sure that through all the different maze of the approval process that a P3 is able to see the light of day. And we're having some challenges on how we can synchronize that better.
Well, that would be great news, and certainly I know Senator Inhofe and Senator Cardin on this subcommittee, are going to be working hard in that regard. We'll do the same thing on the water subcommittee here, and really looking forward to seeing how we can make that example happen all over the country versus what we're experiencing right now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Bozeman. Senator Cardin.
Well, again, let me thank our witnesses. I think this hearing points out the importance for us, General, to take a look earlier in the process on the next word of bill. Senator Markey is correct. In 2014, we passed the Water Resources Development Bill, which was the first time we had done, I think it was 7 years earlier before we had passed the last one. We made a commitment to pass these bills every 2 years. And we were able to do that in 2016, barely, when the last bills passed by the Congress. And it was a challenge because we had to deal with the rules on how we direct spending, and it was not as easy to figure out all the different nuances. One thing is clear, we're going to see some different rules coming down from this administration, and I think it's going to be important for us, Mr. Chairman, to try to figure this out as a Congress earlier rather than later, which may require some legislative authorization in order to make sure that projects like Mid-Bay are not inadvertently jeopardized because of the budgetary scheduling that's being followed on these projects. So I would just urge us to take an earlier look at just the way that we're going to authorize the next water bill so that we can make sure we get it done next year. I expect it'll be in the next year. It's not going to be this year, but if we could pay a little earlier attention. And Secretary Ryan, I think you were correct to point out that although in Maryland we concentrated on the Mid-Bay, there are many other projects in Maryland and many other projects around the nation. I'm glad that you mentioned the CNO and the C&D, and we also have other projects. The Poplar Island's not finished. We still need resources there. And General, I could mention our efforts to make sure that we protect our coastlines and beach renourishments and hurricane protection. And these are all programs that are going to require our attention as we look at ways to make sure we can modernize our infrastructure and meet the current challenges. And we know that we're going to, under the best of circumstances, the resources are going to be very, very difficult on the public side. You know that. Even if we do well, it's going to be a challenge. So it's right to look for ways that we can leverage and create more opportunities that we all agree are needed. So I think this hearing has been very helpful. I just want to thank all the witnesses for the testimony.
Well, anything further? Well, and I do too, and I thank you, Senator Cardin, for your contribution here and your partnership in these efforts. We've been together doing this for a long time, and we've even measured some success. So I thank all of the witnesses for coming, particularly Grant Humphreys, because I've followed this development, and I use this as kind of a model of what can happen elsewhere. I commented a minute ago about a rarely known fact that we have more miles of freshwater shoreline in our state of Oklahoma than any of the 50 states, and we have a lot of beauty that goes with that. So you've made great contributions there. I thank all the witnesses very much, and we are adjourned. That's a little known fact. Yes, it is. Do you want to
And the senators in this subcommittee heading out now to join others on the floor of the Senate, voting in about 10 minutes there to confirm Scott Gottlieb to lead the Food and Drug Administration.